Chris, I'm just going to let you maybe start us off here. I know you had some things you wanted to talk about in terms of the development and where we're at, and I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're moving along really well. You know, we're heavily in the integration phase, really getting all of the different pieces hooked up: smart contracts, server, the indexer, the client itself, and I think that that's progressing really nicely. Um, Obviously, still ongoing work with UI that Sergey I know we'll be happy to talk about in a minute. But generally, I just wanted to, I think, give a bit of an update on where we're at with this integration process. Most of you probably saw an announcement in Discord, I think on Monday. As of tomorrow, late afternoon, my time, I think 9 p.m. GMT time, we'll be effectively freezing the minting of those RVOD crewmates from asteroids on L1, as well as pausing the naming and scanning on L1. And the reason for that is that we will, at that point, take a snapshot and begin the process of migrating that data over to StarkNet for our initial mainnet launch. And as a reminder, our mainnet launch is going to be in two phases. The first phase is going to be roughly parity with L1 with a few additions. So the first thing you'll see on StarkNet is, again, the ability to name your asteroids, name your crewmates, scan your asteroids for bonuses. Also, we'll be making sure that the functionality exists there for you to purchase crewmates and asteroids as well, and then also to recruit them. So recruiting Adalians will be live. You'll be able to create those new Adalians with their traits and with their appearances. Additionally, the crew assignments for the RVOD crewmates will be live, and at this point, actually on chain. So if you remember, on L1, they were not on chain. They were basically creating a template for that crew that was ultimately going to be seeded onto StarkNet. By and large, the community said that they'd like the ability to replay those if they wanted to, if they weren't happy with the outcome, or if new information about the game had come out and that kind of changed your strategy, and that's fine. We're going to support that, but this time it will be on chain and final. So once you've run those RVOD crew assignments after the first mainnet launch, those will be final and locked on chain. So that's all coming quite soon. That will be the official mainnet StarkNet launch for Influence, and then that will be followed up with the start of what we're going to be calling pre-release. So previously we called that testnet phase 4. That's now going to be our pre-release period. All of the same goals, but we're going to introduce some, I think, fun events and tie-ins to mainnet as well. So I think that's going to be something to really look forward to, and I think it's going to bring a lot of new community members in and getting their first exposure to Influence and really diving in. So I'm really excited, and things are moving along fast. We're also starting to see in the ecosystem, Argent just released their web wallet. So those of you who used Cartridge, it's a similar concept, similar approach. It's a wallet that is browser-based but does not require the installation of an extension. And it's also including a lot of the kind of multi-sig, multi-factor protections that Argent has, I think, always been trying to innovate around, which is, I think, pretty exciting. And we all know that one of those major UX issues with blockchain is having to remember that clunky public key and address. And this largely gets rid of that issue, and it just ties it to your email, which is a really amazing onboarding experience. If anybody is interested, they also just launched a new NFT marketplace called Unframed. So it's unframed.co. And if you want to go ahead and just create a new account there, you'll be prompted to do that with the web wallet via the email flow. So that's pretty exciting. And then on the StarkNet front, they're working rapidly towards building out support for EIP 4844, which is not all that much more friendly named proto-dank sharding. But the basic idea is that it will pretty drastically reduce the fees for L2 rollups. They're also at the same time and in parallel working towards Volition, which generally aims to do the same thing, but represents an even larger decrease in the fees for the storage of data. So lots of really exciting things happening that are all kind of leading us towards the point which any gamer can come and pick up Influence and play as if it's a normal game that is not kind of blocked by all of these somewhat difficult to understand UX flows that exist in blockchain at the moment.
Exciting.
So yeah,
and hey man,
lots of exciting stuff.
You think logging in with your email is user friendly? Try logging in with your retinal scan, like WorldCoin.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is stare at a basketball-sized chrome sphere, and you're good to go.
WorldCoin Max is here on stage. One thing I did want to just call out, EIP 4844 for those who are technically inclined, and Volition, when you read things about like 100x decrease in gas, they aren't like, they don't do 100x and then 100x more. There's Chris can probably speak to this a little bit more, but it's not like one's going to come out and then all of a sudden it's 100x cheaper after it already reduces by 100x. So it will reduce costs of transactions, but it's not going to put them into the sub-cent range quite yet.
Oh, that's true. Although we do have a strategy for that as well, and I think I may have mentioned that in general or game questions somewhere the other day. We ultimately see Influence as living on a layer 3, where those costs really would be sub-cent, almost nil. And I think that's really the point at which we can lean into the decentralized operation of Influence at that point amongst the Influence community. Like that's really the point where I hope that all of you run an Influence node, and we would obviously be designing the ecosystem such that would be incentivized, because it's obviously a major part of keeping Influence alive and running. So that's an exciting possibility. That is probably 6 months from now at minimum. So initially we will be in a situation where we're kind of, our goal, our target right now is to shoot for that sort of 5 to 10 cents per game action range.
I also want to just express that doesn't mean launch or anything is aligned with that. It's just that feasibility.
But that's where we will get.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's for example, that's vital for us to ultimately get to conflict. The pace will pick up. Nobody's going to want to be participating in conflict if it's the pacing is having to be based around a 5 to 10 cent per transaction pace. I think it would be a little bit too slow. So that's kind of necessary for us to reach our ultimate goals, but it's coming.
Yeah, Chris, I know that you may have wanted to mention a bit of what was in the news, and I don't know if you'd like to start that off, but I think this would probably be a good time before we dive into what Sergey and Proto are doing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure many of you probably saw that that Star Alice is going through some difficult times. I think they had to lay off roughly 75% of their team on Monday, which sucks. They were building a game that had a pretty massive goal. It was an exciting one, in sort of a tangentially related genre, I guess, to Influence. And I was, enjoying watching their development process, but I think inevitably it's going to be slower at this point, which is unfortunate. I guess I just wanted to make sure that our community knew that our we're not at risk of doing that. We've had, I think, a admittedly more constrained vision initially, something that we felt very comfortable delivering on given the resource constraints that we had. And we're continuing on that path, and I remain very confident that we will deliver that. And I think it's going to be a pretty amazing game. I did want to add that, you know, influence, as has been currently outlined, is our current vision, and it is, I call it constrained because in some ways it is. You know, it doesn't represent the vision of what we see as possible in the influence universe. That vision is far larger, but I didn't feel like it was responsible or really fair to the community and to the, you know, you guys and the people we were talking to initially about influence to promise that right off the bat. But I want to assure everybody that, you know, we're going to be here indefinitely. Influence has a lot more to be added. I mean, you can imagine, and I'll throw a few hints in here, but you can imagine we have these 5 planets sitting around right now, certainly with the technology level the way it is, and the resources that are available to the Adalians. Terraforming is not really feasible. It's an extremely resource-intensive, high-technology process, but with the introduction of discovery and future, who knows? So we do have, I think, a pretty expansive vision in a pretty awesome universe, but we are still very committed to staying focused and being persistent about delivering what we have already committed to with influence.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Chris in general. It's been a lot of fun, and I have always felt very confident in leadership here. So, you know, I know you guys don't get to have the conversations that we as the team members all do all the time, but you know, we operate like a well-oiled machine, the best that we can, and I'm really, really happy that we have Chris at the helm here. But, you know, to go a little bit further in what we're doing, I'd love to maybe, I'm thinking, Proto, why don't you start us off with production chain, and then we can move into UI that Sergey's been working on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for production chains, the focus for the past few weeks and, you know, for the past few months actually has been or month, I guess, has been the process timings, working on those sort of M and B values for each of the processes. You know, again, that's kind of a important step to do for the balancing for the production chains, because it impacts basically the time cost of every product, you know, both for producing that product directly in the process that makes it, and also for producing all the inputs to that product. How long those each take, you know, impacts the total cost of time cost of producing a particular product. So trying to get those in, moving along pretty well on those. But as soon as that's done, I can move on to balancing, and you know, looking forward to hitting that finally. Probably more interesting than the production chain stuff that I've been working on right now. There have been a few interesting mechanics updates / you know, finalizations that, you know, might bear discussing briefly here. Nothing huge, nothing crazy. But the main thing that and Sergey is going to go into this in detail, I think, in his update. But the leasing / agreements / policies stuff has been getting a bit more polished the past couple of weeks. You know, I'm really excited to you know, for you guys to see the UI that Sergey is working on. I'll leave it at that, but it's like coming along pretty nicely. And also just few little tidbits. I think we have confirmed finally that the resource scan for resources on the surface of asteroids will actually require you to have a ship in orbit to take that scan. So that's the one that lets you generate the heat maps for where all the resources are on your asteroids and the sort of bulk abundances for those resources. So again, this is sort of just like a little fun piece that basically means, you know, in order to get all the details on how your asteroid, you know, what it has on it and where it has that stuff on it, will require you to actually fly there first, which is basically how it works in the real world. You know, you can sort of spy on things from long distances with telescopes and get a general sense of like what they're made of, and that's sort of the bonuses scan, the long range scan, or I guess the surface scan potentially that we're calling it. You know, that's the existing one that you guys have already done on layer 1, and then there's this new one that is the orbital scan that you'll be doing for the heat maps. So, you know, it's kind of fun to just sort of see how that happens in real life, where you have to send a spacecraft to a location in order to like really get your sort of telescope pointed down at it and start taking spectral scans and figuring out like where all the resources are on that surface. and you'll have to do that as well in Implement. So that's a fun little decision there. I think that's probably one of the main ones that's the bears discussing.
Carter, do you want to mention the shipyard?
Yeah, that's actually a good one too. Good point. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So for processes in the production chain, the vast majority of them, you take some set of input products, and again, a product is a fungible within an inventory count of some item in the game. It's like water or tainite or even pieces of things like modules or whatnot. Those exist in inventories and are fungible. You take some products as an input and you do some things, and you get one or more products as an output, and that's just sort of how all these processes work. So it starts in an inventory, does some stuff, and then the outputs go back into an inventory. However, the shipyard has three things that do not work like that, and that's the three ships. So you're taking the sort of highest level components and modules like the ship hull and the various ship modules, and you're integrating them together into ships. And ships are not products. They don't live in inventories. They are actually a completely different thing, and they can live, if it's a light transport, it can either be on the surface of an asteroid, or if it's a heavy transport or a shuttle, it can be on a spaceport. And so the way we're actually setting it up is that the shipyard, sends those completed ships when you finish them to one of those locations. You have to pick that location. But what that means is it's a different process, a different, differently structured process in that, you choose the inputs like normal, you choose which ship you want to make, but then you have to choose a different kind of location that's not in inventory as the output. And so, long story short, what that led us to is that you can actually, we think we will be allowing you to run the normal processes in the shipyard, which include making a lot of those ship modules, various other sort of manufacturing, slightly lower level manufacturing processes that can happen in the shipyard that work exactly the same as the factory. Those will be one sort of track of things you can do in the shipyard, and then the ship integration, like creating one of those three ships. Is a separate track. So what that means is you can actually do two things at once in the shipyard. You can have one crew who is going and starting up a manufacturing process for some of the higher level shipyard components, and potentially a second crew, optionally, if you want, they can actually also be working on have a ship being built at the same time. And so this is actually a kind of novel mechanic, because like all the other production chain buildings, like the extractor, the refinery factory, bioreactor, those are all single track buildings where you start a process and the building is locked up. You can't do anything else with it until that process that's currently in process in it is over. Shipyard now is slightly unique in that it can have two things going on at once, one of which being a ship integration and one of which being a normal process. So that's something I think will be really fun to sort of see how people use that in the game.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of also maybe a preview of the sort of way that some of these buildings may upgrade with Discovery, where while they only have one slot today, you can imagine a highly advanced extractor potentially being able to run 10 slots at the same time. So you'll get a little bit of a preview with that with the shipyard having multiple productive slots.
Yep.
Proto, Chris, did you want to clarify kind of the asteroid scan versus resource scan? So for bonuses versus resource maps, I'm not sure if that was clear.
Yeah, I can take another stab at that. So there's the layer 1 scan that you guys have already done. That's the one that produces the bonuses on your asteroid. So the 3% yield bonus, or the 25% organics, or 20% organics bonus, or whatever it is that you got in your asteroid, and those determine the rarity rating that the asteroid gets. You guys are all pretty familiar with from OpenSea or wherever. So that's the quote unquote layer 1 scan, and what we're calling either the bonuses scan or the long range scan or the surface scan. We'll come up with a final terminology shortly. You can expect that. But it's the long range one. It's the one that you do. You can do it anytime. You're not constrained. If you're the owner of the asteroid, you're not constrained in having to be there to do it. But then the second one is the resources scan or the orbital scan, which is where you're up close, you're at the asteroid with a ship. You send a ship there, it's in orbit now, and now you can conduct the resources scan, and that will tell you the heat maps, where all the resources are on the surface of the asteroid. And that one's the one that gates whether you can land on the asteroid, build buildings on it. If you haven't done that, you can't land, you can't build buildings. So, that's the sort of general flow, is that, you buy an asteroid, you would long range scan it, you send a ship there, you do the orbital scan, and then you can land and build buildings.
What I'm curious for everybody who's here and listening, what's your favorite? What's like the most evocative and interesting way to refer to that first scan? I think we've got bonus scan, surface scan, or long range scan.
I'd love to hear.
If you want to add in chat, I'd love to hear it.
You think of this as like a telescope, on the RVOD, pointing at the various asteroids and getting information about it.
And to also go a little bit deeper in the lore, I know, Chris, you've mentioned a long time ago, but to maybe bring it up again, just because I think it's fun. It's these bonuses come from kind of like features on the asteroid, so like deep craters or things like that. Obviously, it's not associated with the actual look of your asteroid; those are programmatically generated, I think. But the lore behind it is kind of like you have these bonuses because maybe they're more accessible due to the features of your asteroid.
Yeah, and it's the sorts of things that you could identify from long range with a telescope. So it might be like a different albedo from the baseline CMS type. Maybe yours is a bit brighter, and that means certain things, which leads to a higher abundance of the C-type materials, for example. And I think like that's kind of the idea. Whereas once you get there, once you arrive, and you can kind of do that more focused scan, much more high resolution scan, then you actually get a really good idea of exactly where those abundances are.
Yep, and you guys may have seen that we had sort of temporarily combined those with the testnet phase 3. Those were kind of the same scan, and we've separated them back out again because there's some value in having them be done at different times.
So I think one question I know that's going to come up at least a little bit is, Proto, how close are you to delivering the JSON file for people to get all those
Yep.
parts?
I am as excited as you guys are to get that into your hands. It represents obviously a lot of work that I would love for you guys to start digging into. The gating factor for that is I need to have these timings done, the process timings. The pieces that go into this obviously are what you've already seen, which is the sort of inputs and outputs for, like, first of all the products, all the processes with their names, and the inputs and output products for each process. Those are all the stuff that I finished months ago, is sort of the basic definitions of those processes. And then the recipes, which is the actual numbers that go with each of the inputs and outputs, which I finished more recently, like in sort of end of last month. And then the timings, which are for each process, the sort of constant factor, and then this factor that scales with how many standard recipes of that process you're making. So that's what I'm working on right now. As soon as I've got all that, that's when I will be comfortable releasing that JSON. The one thing that is not done and probably will not be in that JSON, at least the pre-balancing version of it, is the product volumes. They all have masses right now, which is just like the mass per unit of each of those volume of products. Some of them have volumes right now. Some of them are still waiting on that. The reason it's not done yet is because it's not actually important for the balancing particularly, so it got a little bit lower priority, but that'll be wrapped up, and I think the JSON release after the balancing will also be gated by volumes being done, so that'll be sort of pretty close to final JSON for the production chains. But the one that will come out next is just the one that has all the first pass of the recipes and timings and everything.
I do see some newer people in the audience that aren't typically here, and I just want to let everyone know what we're talking about when it comes to that JSON file. The community developers use that to put into their kind of production chain viewers and things like that. So third-party tools to be able to allow you to explore the production chains a little bit more deeply rely on that. And it's been outdated for quite a while, and we're getting very close to releasing the new one. So I think next up, Sergey, I don't know if you're going to screen share today or anything, but I think you have plenty to update when it comes to the UI. If you're talking, Sergey, we can't hear you. We'll give him a minute. Yeah, I think we're getting that settled here or figured out. I don't know if you guys saw, but I just want to give a shout out to Starksite, Travis and Direk. have made a really cool community forum that's integrated with analytics and a whole bunch of other things that is really cool. And anyone here can log in with Discord or their wallet, whatever it might be, and make posts on it. So I actually made a post today, if you guys want to check it out, just around crew strategy and what I think is probably going to be some popular, crew compositions. So just a big thank you to you guys for all the hard work, and I'm hoping people, dive in and give it a try. Sergey, are you back? Uh-oh. You were talking earlier, so I'm not sure what happened or what changed.
I think it may actually be that anybody who can't hear him may themselves have to exit and re-enter. So Discord is sometimes funky like that, so I can't hear him, so I'm gonna leave and come back.
Okay,
and I can hear him.
Just join or leave and join back. Sometimes Discord is funky. Well, yeah.
Checking again. Check. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I did get disconnected earlier, so maybe something weird happened with the channel, but excellent.
Sergey, real quick before you start, I did want to answer the couple of quick questions in chat. There's questions about crew job bonuses. Those are part of this balancing pass, so they're not ready yet, but they're actively being discussed and tweaked, so they will be soon. And I just want to remind everybody one more time that during the pre-release period, a big part of that effort is to lock in balance, and so it is likely that there will still be some additional tweaks. So don't take what the next round of balance releases as gospel for mainnet launch, but it will be very close.
Yeah,
things will change in this game, just as a general fact.
I've had a few people also a little confused because we had bonuses put in this last phase 3 test. Those were just placeholders. So please, if anyone's thinking those are accurate, strike that from your brain. They aren't. They were just there to kind of show that the crews, affect things in different ways. But yeah, I think Sergey.
All right, cool. Sure, yeah. Okay, so I'll just lead off by saying, UI discussion and sharing. I do not have anything to share today, unfortunately.
Oh no, you cut out. I don't know if he cut out for everyone, but for me.
Yeah, he's back.
Yep. Am I still cutting out? Maybe I just have a poor connection over here.
You lost you for a moment, but you're back.
Is that right? I can hear all of you guys pretty fine.
We can hear you.
Still bad? I'll try to keep going. If it gets bad, just let me know. Maybe I could try switching.
We lost you again.
Saying it's bad. Okay. I'll disconnect.
He'll be back.
Proto, should we start at a high level, kind of just a general background on how policies and agreements work? Maybe it's a refresher, but it might be worth it as an introduction.
You want to do that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you go for it.
So everything we're about to talk about here and that Sergey was about to talk about falls under sort of the general category of permissions and access control for assets in the game. And the assets that are particularly affected by this are asteroids, ships, and buildings. And the asteroids work a little bit differently from the ships and buildings, so it probably bears talking about them sort of in separate categories, but they're closely related too, so a lot of the concepts apply to both. But the general idea is that for asteroids, the challenge that access control needs to basically meet is who gets to have exclusive control over lots on an asteroid. If you own an asteroid, it belongs to you. Just in the default starting case, then obviously you are the one who controls every single lot on the asteroid. And what that means in practice is basically that anybody who builds on there is squatting. Other than you, they're squatting, and you can evict them at any time. Like that's what control means, is basically having the ability to evict a squatter at any time from that lot and sort of repossess their building and anything that's in the building, or send any crews there to orbit, or send any ships there to orbit. So that's a pretty heavy, powerful thing to be able to do, is to control a lot. However, obviously, if you own an asteroid that's bigger than 50 or 100 lots or whatever, like there's probably no chance that you're going to be able to use all of those yourself, and so you want to be able to give other people that same level of control over those lots. And particularly, you probably want to be paid by people in a lot of cases. If you're an alliance, maybe you just want to do that for free. But if you're hoping to be like an asteroid landlord, you want to give that control, that permission to people to have that control over their lots to other people in exchange, probably for money. And so the way we do that is with this sort of access control system, these permission systems. And the one that you guys are most familiar with, of course, is the leasing approach. So broadly speaking, like what we've done is we've sort of segmented the different ways that you can control an asset or control the permissions for an asset into things called policies. And basically what a policy is it sets how others can give themselves permissions to that asset. And again, a permission, there's different kinds of permissions. Like, for a ship, for example, there might be a permission to board the ship. There might be a different permission for adding cargo or moving cargo. Those are each sort of different things that you can do, different actions that you can take with that asset. And so the policy, it grants other people the ability to give themselves access to certain permissions and access to certain actions on that asset. And that access is what we are calling agreements. So an agreement is basically the permission to do something with a particular asset that has been sort of written down, put in, I won't call it stone, but it's on chain, that you have permission to do that thing. And a policy, again, gates people being able to create those things for themselves. For the lots in particular, for asteroids, the way that basically works is that we've got three different kind of general types of policy on an asteroid. We've got the private policy, which basically just means that this asteroid is mine. Nobody else can give themselves create agreements that let them have control of lots. Like that's just not allowed. I want to maintain exclusive control of this rock, and obviously that's the default policy for every asteroid. You'll have to go in and manually change that if you want other people to have access. For the other two, though, there's I guess we're calling it the standard lease, which is the sort of leasing that we've described in the past, where you can pick some set of lots on the asteroid, and for that set of lots, choose the various lease terms for a sort of nice little simple continuous lease model. So basically, you're choosing the rate at which, for each lot, like how much sway per real month you have to pay in order to have exclusive control of that lot, and then sort of what a notice period might be. So how long you would need to be given notice by the asteroid owner in order for them to sort of terminate that agreement. Things like that. It's a really simple lease. You just pay however much time you want, and then you have that long. You can always extend that up to a certain point, and it works like that. It's pretty nice. And again, that lets people generate their own agreements. So you come along and you're seeing an asteroid, and you go and see which lots are up for lease, and you pick one, and you're like, okay, I want that one. I'm gonna go through the agreement generation process, and I'll pay the sway that I need to reserve this for, say, 3 months or 6 months. That sway goes immediately to the asteroid owner, or whoever whatever starting account owns the crew that belongs to the asteroid, or the asteroid belongs to. And then from there, you have that agreement in place, which gives you exclusive permission to evict crews from that lot, or evict other people from that lot. So you basically control the lot. And importantly, an agreement isn't something that the asteroid owner can just go and yoink away again. Like it's there to protect the leasee, the tenant, just as much as it is to protect the landlord. It's sort of like a contract. It's a contract basically. So that's the basic one. The more interesting one, of course, is what we've in the past called third-party contracts. What we're currently calling like a custom policy. And that's your ability to go in and actually choose an arbitrary third-party contract that you or somebody else has created that conforms to a certain interface, a certain has to work in a certain way. But what that does is it actually allows you to put pretty arbitrary logic around who can lease and how much they have to pay, and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to have like alliance membership lists, or if you want to have different costs for lots at different locations, if you want to just have like a allow list for your friends, like there's all sorts of things you can do there with a custom contract. And we expect that there will be some pretty generic, nice custom contracts created right off the bat by people, even maybe us, that allow you to do some sort of interesting things. But the point there is that when you're picking that policy, you just pick the contract address, and then anybody who's coming along and wants to take control of a lot in that situation needs to make sure that contract allows them to do so. Like maybe they don't have to do anything. Maybe they're already like a member of an alliance, and it just lets them claim lots however they want. Maybe it's also a situation where you have to go and pay that contract first, and then you can come back and create an agreement and get control of those lots. But the point being that contract is what gates your access to the creating of an agreement that gives you access to that asteroid, or to that lot on the asteroid. So those are the sort of basic mechanics for the asteroid leasing. For ships and for buildings, it gets a little bit more interesting because there are multiple permissions in play. Like for the lot, it's literally just that one. Like, do you control the lot? Are you the user of the lot? Is it yours? And can you evict people with it? Like that's the sort of one action that you get, and it's exclusive. For ships and buildings, it's different because there are different permissions. Like boarding a ship, or adding cargo, or removing cargo, or using an extractor, or adding or removing stuff from a warehouse. Like all those kinds of different things you can do with these buildings or ships. They have different permissions associated with them. And so the way we've set it up is actually that each permission potentially can have its own policy for one of these assets. And again, you're setting this up as the asset owner. So if you own a ship, you can go in and say, okay, I want to create, set up this one particular policy that applies to the boarding a ship. So here's like maybe it's like a lease situation where you're like a space line and you're just leasing access to your bus basically. You buy a pass to the bus and you can get on it anytime you want if you have that pass. So maybe you just set that up with a standard lease policy, and then anybody can lease access to your space line that's just going back and forth and back and forth. Or maybe you want to like have it be a pay per access sort of situation. So when somebody goes and boards it, they've used up their ticket and they would have to pay again. Like those are all things you could set up with, say, a standard with a custom policy that's associated with the boarding permission. Maybe you want to also add the cargo to that situation. So it's actually, a custom contract that grants the permission to board and add cargo and remove cargo. So that's something you can do as well. You can set all three of those permissions to have the same policy. And again, policies are something that let you create agreements. So if somebody comes along and they pay you, for example, to have access to your ship, then they get an agreement or potentially multiple agreements for each of the permissions that they got. And that those agreements allow them then to use the ship in that particular way for however long the agreement was set up to last for, under whatever conditions that it was set up to last for. So it's a very powerful situation. You have sort of fine-grained control over these access permissions. And we really can't wait to see what people start to do with these. But I think that more or less covers it. Sergey, yeah.
The options are limitless, if I may. Hey, is my connection working a little better now? Okay. All right. I think I said I had some files syncing in the background that were disrupting it. But I'm just going to build off of that and also mention that this whole thing is the agreement system and permission system. And definitely Proto or Chris, feel free to jump in because this is something we've been jamming away on for the better part of a month. It is something that initially started out, at least for me, as the leasing system, where we talked about it for a long, long time. We just had the ability for people to, basically rent out a lot on their asteroid. And we thought it'd be cool to see what would the market rate for a lot producing 97% water or something like that be, end up belt wide as a simple, kind of oh, hey, I can make more use out of the asteroid land that I own kind of thing. And it morphed into something that was much, much more complex, but also more interesting, as Proto just mentioned with these custom agreements. And it is a custom agreement that applies both to the lot, but also to asset types. And you can imagine. So basically, it's giving other people, other wallets, basically permissions up to you to decide to revoke or give permissions to do basically anything with any of the assets that you own for any specific amount of time. And the agreements are from the very basic things that we will just allow that come boilerplate with the game that will allow you to do in client to code your own custom agreements to your heart's content. I think there's some really fun examples. I'll just list a couple that I find fascinating with the system that occurred to me. But one from that Chris mentioned super often in Eve, but this is for multiplayer gaming. When you have shared assets that are shared by an alliance or an asteroid and stuff like that, it's really important that these things aren't siloed, where it's difficult for people who are on your team to use your stuff or to pool resources or something like that. It's very easy. One super common thing would be you can create a custom agreement so that you have a warehouse. That warehouse will allow anybody on this specific, your specific alliance whitelist to input stuff into the warehouse. It will not allow anybody except for, I don't know, maybe the alliance directors to take stuff out of the warehouse. So it allows people to basically pool really, really easily stuff for their alliance, and then you take it to market, and then the alliance can do whatever they want with it. Another really fun non-alliance thing that these kind of asset-wide agreements allow for you to do is, for example, say I have a warehouse. I own a warehouse. It's got all of the components needed to build like a shuttle, like some really high-end stuff, all the components needed to build a ship on that warehouse. I could go take those components to market, but say I just wanted to have fun, I would go into permissions editing for that warehouse. I would set the allow to take stuff out of the warehouse to public for that warehouse only. And then I'd go to Discord and I'd say, warehouse 497. I just renamed this warehouse, for example. I renamed it the free stuff bin on this asteroid. And I would just say, hey, free shuttle up for grabs, first come, first serve at this warehouse. And then you just created with with a very simple action, you just created this awesome belt-wide race. Whoever gets to your warehouse first has permissions to grab whatever because it's public. You can do the reverse. I think it would be very fun and very common for people to set up a warehouse and say you don't allow people to take stuff out of the warehouse, but you set the input stuff to public, meaning anyone who wanted to on all of Adalia Prime could just come along and drop you stuff. Now, why would they do that? I don't know, but it might be kind of fun to log in one day and find some sort of gift lying there in your warehouse. And that was purely through the nature of this super flexible permissions agreement system that allows all kinds of really interesting asset interactions and both gifting and multiplayer stuff to take place that frankly a lot of games don't have. If you think about a lot of standard MMOs, they're very one way. You have one kind of centralized account that owns all the stuff. You kind of do your grind, you build up the stuff in that account, whether it's characters, your pool of resources, or whatever. Very, very limited ways to trade or rent or do other stuff with the permissions to those assets. And we're going to open this up in a huge way.
There's so many examples.
We could do a take a penny, leave a penny, and the results of that feed into the reputation system.
Yeah, it's also something that alliances and things like that could leverage some public warehouses that are owned by a trustworthy person to say, hey, come here, buy things off the marketplace. If you don't already have a warehouse, you can just store them in one of these public buildings that has access for anyone to, basically put things in there. And then when you want it out, you just DM me at blah, 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 or whatever it might be. And that might make a frictionless way to do that without having to construct your own warehouse on various asteroids.
Mm-hmm. I think it's even more so. Chris, maybe you can speak to your kind of alliance leading days in Eve. So Eve had a very already for its time, I think pretty advanced permission system that allowed you to give roles to various alliance directors to do stuff. But Eve didn't even go as far as we are already in the first pass because Eve had ships. You can't, for example, rent out a ship to someone. Alliances gifted ships to their members, and if you lost a ship, you might have to deal with their alliance leadership to refund it or whatever. They had their ship replacement programs. But in no way did Eve give as fine-grained control over basically every player-owned asset in the way that we're sort of proposing here.
No, I think you're right. And I think a big part of the inspiration in wanting to build influence was really wanting to expand on the freedom, I guess, that organizations had to evolve and grow and try different models. Beyond that, which Eve had. I mean, Eve had layered on a lot of hierarchy. At launch, there was no alliances. There certainly was no coalitions. But even then, the structure was very rigid. It was always hierarchical. The sorts of permissions that you could assign for warehouses or things like warehouses were all fairly constrained. But now we have this ability. We're providing I hope maybe 80% of the use cases out of the box. But there are so many, sort of like an infinite number of possibilities that now can be explored, because I think Sergey, is like, as you like to say, and I really like this, like we have a moddable server. Anybody can come in and say, hey, here's this custom contract. It's got all of these incredible functionalities. You can design your permission system such that it is based on reputation. It tells you how much you can take out based on your reputation, et cetera. Like, there's just so much potential depth there that I think it's going to give rise to just a ton of different types of organizations that really couldn't exist, or if they could, it would be very tenuous in most other, maybe all other MMOs, just because there's no ability to enforce any of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty excited to see all of these different permutations.
And speaking of, so this is an interesting one to probably cover, but like speaking of out of the box, kind of coverage of policies, what we're allowing for, and also like what we're not, like we actually had an internal team debate on this, and it was interesting to say, the ability to like assign a custom rental value per lot, like depending on X number of factors. This is something that will require a custom contract. Now, that functionality exists, but it's hidden behind, the ability to go to StarkScan or be able to write a blockchain contract, which hopefully it'll be, maybe incentivize some people to learn that. But for now, like we thought, like, one of the common use cases might be, like you're going to have lots on your asteroid. Right now, you can assign a blanket rental policy. You can be like, okay, 10,000 sway per month for this lot, for the average lot on an asteroid. But if you know that your asteroid has like really valuable hotspots and other less valuable hotspots in the asteroid, you want to assign a different rental price to some lots and not others. You are going to have to go in there with a custom contract and write that contract for your own asteroid, so that when someone shows up at that asteroid, wants to rent this lot, they're going to look at the contract. The contract is going to do its logic and say, this lot is this much per month because it's like, high abundance and
Yep.
X
And one important point there is
like
that when you set up a policy for something and then people go and use that to create agreements, they pay you for access or whatever, and they get an agreement in place. If you then go and like change the policy, for example, if you want to like up your rent or change, other aspects of your policy there, the existing agreements don't get changed. You can't just like go and yoink, all the agreements that you already had by changing the policy. So if you have an asteroid full of people who have a really good deal on renting lots and you want to raise your price, they will all continue to get that good deal until the end of their the terms of their agreements runs out, and then they can go back and create new agreements with you for the new price. So just something to keep in mind is that this isn't like a there aren't any complicated how do you change other people's agreements situations. It's like they just exist until they run out, and then you can make new ones.
Right. Well, that's the notice period, right? You're talking about that's how much they have. If you want to switch it up on them, they have until the notice period.
If somebody has, say, paid for 6 months, and you have a 2-month notice period, and they're still 4 months out from the end of their 6 months, you can then go in and actually pay back 2 months worth of rent, and then they would have only 2 months left on their agreement. So that's sort of if you want to end it earlier than what they paid for. That's how the notice period works for our standard lease. So that would be
yeah. But it does touch on that, because if they had a really good deal for those 6
Right,
months, you could kind of cut the last 4 months out from under them if you really wanted to kind of play that game. But then reputational issues would
exactly. So
hopefully.
it isn't just like you have X months. It's there's a period of time, but potentially also other logic. So for our standard lease that has that notice period, the tenant or the landlord could go in and set for custom contracts, custom policies. That could be arbitrary types of things. There might be all sorts of interesting little terms about how you could end an agreement early from either side of the equation. So you have to make sure you understand a custom agreement policy before you go and just sign up for it and pay for it. Also, we didn't mention, but there's the concept of an allow list is probably also just good to touch on. For ships and buildings, but not for asteroids. There's something called an allow list, which is basically the ability for the asset owner to go in and just create, give permissions to crews to do various things with that asset, without that other crew needing to do anything and without any policy needing to be in place. So basically, like imagine if you set up your space airline or whatever to rent access to your ships. But you have a friend you want to just put on your ship for free. You would go in and allow list them to board your ship, and that just basically gives them the permission to do that with no other complexity involved. And then they can get on your ship, and they can fly around. And if you were done with that, or had a falling out or whatever, you could go and revoke that later at any time, and they would no longer be able to board your ship. So just sort of like a nice little fine-grained tool for going in and giving somebody access to like use your warehouse, or for friends or for alliance members or whatever you want to do. But again, it has to be like one at a time. You have to go in and sort of grant somebody permission to do something, one permission, one crew, one asset at a time. If you want to do something that's sort of more bulk and broad, like granting all alliance members access to a set of buildings or whatever, you probably want to do that with a custom policy rather than an allow list.
I mean, I think to kind of just summarize everything, it's just want this game to be extremely collaborative if you guys want to play as teams, or regardless of being solo, being able to have flexibility. And I think Chris and Proto and Sergey have been massively in their zone, trying to figure out how to provide that value in this game. And I think they've hit the nail on the head. Obviously, functionality will be missing that some people think of that they want, but with that hook ability to cut for custom contracts, I'm sure there will be a marketplace for people who can build those for whether it's alliances or just someone who wants to have one built for themselves.
Yep, and one other point. Okay.
Yeah, I was just saying that there's just some really cool, I think, possibilities that arise out of this. Like one of the buildings, the marketplace, for example, we haven't 100% committed to if there's going to be 2 or 4 permissions, but you can imagine that if we went with 4 and you had the ability to assign permissions for makers and takers on both the sell and buy side, you could have some really interesting marketplaces. You could have the company store, or you could have a type of marketplace where your alliance is advantaged in that they can set certain types of orders, whereas the public can't. And I think like this kind of carries across all of the different buildings and the ships in the game. Like there's so many interesting possibilities, even right off the bat without any custom contracts, and those will only add to the interest.
And one other point I just wanted to quickly bring up was that there are certain actions that you can take with assets that are considered to be owner only. So for a good example of that would be flying a ship. For the time being, the way we want it is that only the actual asset owner can fly that ship, can take those actions around launching it or landing it or planning a route to a different asteroid with it, loading fuel on it, putting it into emergency mode, those kinds of things. Those are things that we really want to keep, sort of exclusive to the asset owner, so that you can, if you wanted to, for example, go and rent out control of a ship to somebody else, you couldn't do that with the permission system. You'd need to do that more at a higher level with some sort of ERC 721 access or situation like that. Or temporarily like assigning which crew the ship belongs to. You could do that and take it back again in some way. But you'd have to do that at a different level than the permission system. Maybe in the future we would assess that, if there was a strong demand for, having those kind of higher level things be also part of the agreement system. But we do think that there's a strong utility for having some things that are the exclusive preserve of asset owners.
Well, we're coming up right against time. Chris, is there anything else that you want to maybe bring up or say before we kind of close this out?
No, I think unless there's any questions in general, we can answer those for a few minutes.
As we see whether or not questions are going to come in here, I just want to say, we don't have a date on our pre-release or anything else yet, but we'll give you guys that 2-week notice at minimum. And just in the spirit of kind of what we're talking about with permissions and access and making this game collaborative, we're working on methods to ensure that, at pre-release, you guys can collaboratively complete, missions and things like that together. So maybe shared goals, things like that. So currently thinking of what that could look like and kind of defining out what that would look like on the dev side. But I'm really excited, and we're drawing close.
I think pre-release is gonna be a lot of fun. I mean, it's gonna be effectively the full game, less some iterative improvements and balance tweaks. But it's gonna be sort of like this totally low stress, low stakes period of time where you can just kind of experiment and enjoy all of these new mechanics. I'm pretty excited to play as well.
From the perspective of somebody who has not been actually like in the code for this game much at all. Last time, like earlier in the spring, I was hearing Charlie and Patrick and Chris making noises about, oh yeah, we're working on the SDK, we're stitching things together, like working, pulling UI into the client, that sort of stuff was happening. I wasn't really seeing much, and it just was sort of happening in the background. And then one day, all of a sudden, they're like, oh yeah, the client's up and you can just go play with it. And I went and played with it. And I'm like, oh my god, this is all of testnet phase 3 that I can now just play with all of a sudden. Like, to me, it felt like very sudden. Like, and then in retrospect, I was like, oh yeah, they're making noises like they've been working on this for weeks and weeks, and that makes sense now that this is what they've been working on. And they are making those same noises right now. Exactly, you're making those noises right now.
Well, those are the noises we're making now.
I know now that this means that there is going to be a sudden drop at some point where it's like, oh yeah, here's pre-release. You can play with it now. I'm so excited. So excited.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, we're not hiding it from you. We aren't silently playing it in the background yet either. So we'll hopefully get there pretty soon.
And once we won't be able to hide it. We'll be sharing it.
I'm sort of playing it from a CLI.
Guys, thank you all for attending. As always, this is a lot of fun for us, and we hope you find value in it. If you guys have any further questions, comments, whatever it might be, drop those in the general or game questions channel, and have a great day.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.